Hi, I actually have to correct my little blurb in the conference. He was 3 months old when I submitted it, but he's actually 6 now. It turns out that babies get older. Right, so I'm here to talk to you guys about handling the combination of parenting and programming. I don't know about you guys, but I find it's really easy to feel that programming can take over your whole life. By the time you've got work, trying to do some open source, maybe work on your own projects, go to meetups, go to conferences, even, awesome conferences like this one, it all takes a lot of time. And then if you've got kids, you know that quickly becomes a 24/7 sort of activity. So this talk is about trying to combine the two. So out of interest, how many people here have kids? Okay, so that's most of the room. Anyone not have kids, but they sort of think it might happen one day? And okay, yep. Well, I didn't want to be like, okay, who's planning on having kids, and their employer going, really? Okay, so there were a couple of hands there. And now, how many people just sort of thought this might be a cruisy talk right before lunch? Yeah, fair enough. Hopefully it shouldn't be too stressful. Right. So, why a talk about parenting and programming? I proposed this talk primarily because when I was a beginning developer, I thought that I'd probably have kids one day, but and I sort of couldn't quite imagine how you combine that. And like, was it possible to work from home? Was it possible to work from home while you had a kid at home? Could you still do the things that I really enjoyed, like open source and coming to things like this? And you can sort of see I like to try and plan ahead a bit. So I searched online, but I couldn't find a lot of discussion around it. So I sort of wanted to add some more discussion around this and hopefully help out people who might be in the same situation I was in a few years ago. Also, I then had a child, and then I really needed some advice on what I should be doing and what I was doing wrong. So why me? I'm not an expert. I'm really not qualified to give this talk at all. I have a 6-month-old, and my husband's been on parental leave for 6 months. So as of 2 weeks ago, I'm now trying to stay at home and look after him and work on this presentation. So I quickly learned that this is quite a challenge. So I'm not an expert, but I know a lot of people who've already been in my shoes. So what I did was I sent out a survey and I asked questions of other parents, programming parents I knew around the world. So I got a great selection of responses from all sorts of places and all sort of walks of programming life, from North America, South America, Europe, Australasia, obviously, people whose kids were 6 weeks old to 21 years old, people who developed in Ruby, JavaScript, Objective-C, PHP, Python, people who are employees, business owners, contractors, and the self-employed. So this talk is the collective wisdom of what they told me. I've divided this talk up into 3 major sections. The big picture, the overall sort of guiding principles of good ideas and bad ideas, handling the day-to-day stuff, and then some suggestions of what everyone else could do, things that companies and the community can do to help support programming parents. So the big picture. The number one thing mentioned by basically everyone is to know your priorities. Some people were a little bit circumspect about this. I found I couldn't do both to the best of my ability. One of them had to come second, make a conscious choice about which one it will be. Others were more direct. The best option, I think, is that the demands of the little one always take priority. It really is a decision you have to make yourself, but whichever way you go, the truth is you can only have one top priority. But if you think it over and make a conscious choice which it is, you'll feel much more at peace with the decisions that you make. So be aware of what your priority is, your parenting or your programming, and always ensure that the right one takes precedence. Another major thing is that children, turns out, age. So this is just a stage of your life. In the future, you may even look back on it as quite a short stage. Things change every day. So what works will change constantly as your children grow. Of course, this also means that the moment you think you've got it figured out, you don't. But they primarily change in a good way. What's impossible with really small children often becomes possible again as they grow. A lot of people cut out open source and going to community things when their kids were babies, and found that as they got older, and especially towards school age, things became much more possible again. It gets easier and easier. It's hard to find time with a 1-year-old, easier with a 3-year-old. Everything easier again once kindergarten starts, and easier again at school age. And I organise meetups and participate in open source. I was not doing that when the kids were babies. It gets easier as they get older. So relax. You can have it all, just not all the time. There'll be times when you focus on work and open source, go to meetups and conferences, and there will be months or years at a time when you can't. It's okay. Give yourself permission to not fully be present in your career all the time. There are other things in life. Which ties into another of the things I sort of picked up as major principles. Be kind to yourself. Don't sacrifice your own happiness for others. Think about the emergency instructions for oxygen masks on aeroplanes. Take care of yourself first, then take care of your kids. Also, try and avoid the guilt. I know it's hard, but someone said, I felt in my first few years as a parent, I frequently felt like I was a bad parent and a bad programmer because I didn't have sufficient time to dedicate to both. Just do what you can with the time available and know that you're doing the best you can, and that's okay. You've also got a new normal once you have a child. I think one mistake we do have when having babies is to think or expect we can go back to our old self right away. Give yourself time to figure out your new setup and figure out how to handle your life now. And of course, your mileage may vary. Any advice, including all of this, take it with a grain of salt, figure out what works for you, and ignore the rest. Do whatever works, even if it's unconventional. People have different situations, and people have different temperaments, and so do their kids. It's completely valid to do whatever you need to get through. And don't assume whatever works for you is going to work for everyone else. Right, so that's sort of the major principles I felt encompassed a lot of the advice I got. So dealing with the day-to-day things. Working from home. Now, there are basically two categories of working from home. When you're in charge of the children and when you aren't. If you're in charge of the children, there was basically one piece of advice I got from everyone. Don't. It's pretty much universal. Someone said, I thought I could work and watch the kids at the same time. Not possible. If you're on kid duty, don't even bother working. And I can definitely agree that you just get to the end of the day and you think, how have I got nothing done? So you've been stressing about it and you've still got nothing done. You would have been better off just going, right, not going to bother about it. Also, and thing that was discussed a lot was the influence of watching you use technology on children. Programming while taking care of your kids isn't really good, since kids do what you do, and that means you'd be encouraging them to use a computer, iPad, TV a lot. They just see that you're on a screen and they don't understand that you're working, not just having fun. Probably some of the time you are just having fun, so there's some validity there. I don't really like using a computer too much around small kids. Encourages them to think sitting in front of a screen most of the day is good. They should rather see you be active outdoors or reading. However, sometimes you don't have a choice. If you must work from home and you've got the kids, there are some suggestions. If you possibly can, childcare. Any way you can manage it. I had to hire a part-time nanny to give me time to actually get anything done. I think what manageable in our case is we hired my mum as a live-in nanny. Babysitters, daycare. If you have to work and you're in charge of the kids, try to not be in charge of the kids. Your next chance, sleep. When the kids are sleeping, not when you're sleeping. When the kids are sleeping is the best time to try and get work done, or alternately when they're a bit older, when they're playing on their own, or of course at school. I mostly worked when my son was asleep, naps, but a lot of time after he was put to bed. So I'd work something like 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. a lot of days. I know one thing I've found that people didn't directly mention is that I also find when I put my son down for a nap, he could nap for 20 minutes or he could nap for 4 hours. So it's normally at least an hour, but after that point, I'm just waiting for him. I'm like, I can't start that because he's going to wake up any minute. And then I'd be like, okay, well, he just slept for 4 hours. Why did I get nothing done? But in my mind, he hadn't necessarily done that. So nighttime is sort of the ideal time. I get a lot of work done once the kids and even the wife is in bed. However, there is, of course, a danger in this. It's important to find a good rhythm. I find my sleep hygiene is hugely important to my mood and motivation and problem-solving activity. Again, back to the look after your own needs before your kids, look after your own oxygen mask. Don't sacrifice your own sleep just to try and get your programming and your parenting done. If you're staying up till 4 in the morning trying to work, you have to get up at 8 to mind the kids the next day, maybe you could do it one day, but it's not a sustainable activity. So it's not a good idea. So the other thing is if you're trying to work from home and the kids are at home, but you've got someone else who is in charge of looking after them. Again, still hard. A lot of people still say don't. They will work from co-working spaces. That it's just very hard. Programming requires keeping a lot of things in your head at once, so being interrupted and having noise in the background doesn't work. When they're young, you'll hear them crying. When they're a bit older, they'll come into your office multiple times a day, which can be distracting. So ideally, a lot of people find that they're better off just going somewhere else to work. But of course, it may work for you to work from home, so your mileage may vary. If you are working from home, best to have a dedicated workspace. Find a quiet spot in the house and make it yours. Make it boring and as far away from the things the kids enjoy as you can. And the most desired thing in a home office is a door. Have an office with a door that shuts. Close the door, train the kids not to open it unless someone is bleeding or the house is on fire. Next, to try and help out the working from home in a home office situation, it's important to have boundaries. A good psychological distinction between work and home, and that goes for yourself, so that you know when you're working and when you're at home. Strict schedules and boundaries. So get up early, have breakfast, get dressed into clothes you'd go to an office in, etc., and do it all before you start working. Stop working when you planned you would, and plan a proper lunch break. So again, your work and your home time aren't sort of bleeding into each other. It's also important to have really good boundaries for your kids, so they also know how to deal with the situation. So have a goodbye going to work routine, just like if you were driving off. I say my goodbyes and give my cuddles and kisses before I head into my office, and it creates a mental break for the kids between playing and working time. And finally, also important to have boundaries for other adults. If you have a stay-at-home partner, it's far too easy for them to be tempted to get you to do extra things at home when you should be working. And in fact, one story I was told was when somebody was working from home out of their living room. They just had a desk there, and their mother-in-law was rather offended when she came to visit, and he completely ignored her. Because it can be quite hard for people to see that you're there, but you're technically actually not there. Multitasking is another thing that was discussed. Basically, don't if you can avoid it. If you're not working, be present with your kids. I notice if I'm preoccupied with work when I'm playing with my kids, they're a lot needier and more prone to running into my office when they get upset. So the more quality time I spend with them, the more secure they become that Daddy will in fact be with them later. So again, try and have those boundaries between your work and your home life, even if they occur in the same space. Hey, I have the one talk where I don't have to worry if my kid is making noise. Participating in open source. There are a number of strategies people do to try and get their open source participation in. Work is a major one. If you can get your open source teamed up with your day job, that's a really great way of getting open source contributions without trying to find the time somewhere else in your day. Another is to just keep playing along with things, but just keep things small. I'll only usually make small patches, or making sure that when you want to sit down at a computer and do something, you've thought about it beforehand. So you can just sit down, and type it up. And so you've got your thinking time about it, but that's away from a computer. Of course, another completely valid strategy is just don't bother. Choose your own priorities, and if it's not a high priority for you, just accept that and move on. Some people, I avoid doing anything where a lot of people will be dependent on something I've written, at least until my kids are a bit older. Or I just gave up entirely. The quick response needed and reliable hacking time just wasn't possible after having a kid. Participating in the community, again, comes down hugely to priorities. It's really important to define your priorities and only do what's most important to you. Don't try and attend all the meetups or learn about all the things. Decide what's most important to you and focus on that. I'm from Christchurch, so I don't have a major problem with this because we've got one Ruby meetup a month, but I know in a city like Sydney you can end up with sort of different tangentially related things on, I'm sure, many days of the month. So limit it to the ones that are important. You have to focus to be able to choose and make your decision on what's best for your programming and not which is worst for your liver. The time of day of community things is also a big struggle. And that's often the reason people end up dropping them, because it's not worth the time investment given that it's taking people away from the nighttime routines with their kids. So again, don't bother is also valid. Employment means I have a built-in group to talk to. And you can also participate on mailing lists on Twitter. You don't have to actually physically go to things to participate in the community. Learning, keeping on top of all the new things that are coming out all the time. And effectively, I don't keep on top. Work is a great place to, if you can incorporate learning into your job, again, that's a really good way to do it. The resources that people use for keeping on top of these things, I'm sure, are familiar to everyone. And they're the sort of things that everyone uses. Twitter, blogs, conferences. One major one was digests, things like Ruby Weekly and JavaScript Weekly. Basically anything that's a curated list of topics, because rather than looking at the vast expanse of everything that's available to learn about, you can sort of get these are the top items, quick overview, and move on. So if an area that you're interested in keeping tabs on more closely, see if there's a digest. Also, commute time is a great time to try and slide these things in between your work life and your home life. Learning over lunch and in transit, if you're reading if you're on a train or bus, or listening to podcasts if you're driving. However, you are allowed to have time when you're just doing nothing. Again, just know your priorities. Be selective. You can't keep on top of everything new. Pick the most important and the most popular stuff to know. Just find out the basics of what it does and when you'd use it. But don't try and learn it until you have to apply it in a real project. Don't learn stuff you don't need. You don't have the time. And on time, you also have other things you need to do with your life. So outsource everything you can if you've got the money to do so. Hire people to help you do things you don't absolutely have to do. Like, we have daycare and it's great for us. We also have cleaners and no yard, so that home time is family time. Make sure you keep time for yourself as well. Time to exercise, time to sleep, and time to do some other hobbies as well. You still need to find some time to do what you enjoy. I believe that being a happy person makes you a better, more patient parent. And keep time for your relationship as well. If you have a partner, make sure to make date time. Keep your relationship with them a priority. It really does help to make everything else go much better. And of course, the number one tip for managing your time, don't be afraid to say no. Extended leave, so leave around when your kids are born or possibly a little bit later. The amount of time that people took off ranged quite a lot, from none at all to up to 4 years. So it's a really personal decision. And some people found that it really worked for them, and some people found it didn't. Some people didn't take any, but wished that they had. Some people did, thought they were leaving work and ended up going bonkers. And so they were really pleased to go back to work part-time. And I think it's one of those things that you don't know until you try. So if you feel that you want to, try and figure it out so that you can, if possible. But be aware that you may try it and decide to go back to work, and that's fine too. Minding your mental health if you're being a stay-at-home parent, though, is really important. Someone said, I didn't handle it well at all. I sunk into a severe major depression. It is brutally hard. It is the hardest thing I ever did. You can't do it alone. You will need help. And particularly, he said, men are especially bad at asking for help. I was. So look after any full-time dads you know, as they may not be good at asking for your help. If you're doing this, count your supports. Literally count them. People you could call and ask to hang out with your kids for an evening. If you have fewer than 5, I'd say you need more. And if you start to feel any symptoms of mental illness or depression, go get help for that earlier rather than later. It's harder to fix later. So, things that everyone else can do to help support programming parents. Why is this a topic? Why do companies in the community have a responsibility to make the lives of parents easier? For most people, having kids is a conscious decision, not for all, but for most. And people are usually aware that having a kid is going to come with sacrifices. I think there's a number of reasons, just it's a nice thing to do is one of them, but a major reason is diversity. And diversity doesn't just mean diversity of gender and diversity of race, but also diversity of experience and people's life situations. Anytime we're reducing the sort of people who can participate in our community and workforce, first of all, we're reducing the number of people we can hire, and as I'm sure everyone knows, RubyConf is always hiring, and we desperately need more programmers. Also, diversity of ideas helps develop good software. And of course, there is also the fact that supporting programming parents, parenting is still disproportionately done by women, and there's been a huge push in the Ruby community to get more women into programming. And so supporting programming parents is an important part of continuing that work and helping to retain people in the community. So things that companies could do to support programming parents, it turns out that actually these are mostly things that help everyone out. Keeping a good work-life balance, not pushing overtime, trying to make people work all the time, realizing that people have a life outside. I have a workplace that's family-friendly and supportive. I can drop everything, even at a crucial point in a release, and head off to be with my kids. It's awesome, and more companies should be like this. Flexible hours. For a lot of programming, it's not necessary that the programming occurs between 9 and 5, so it's good to allow some flexibility with this, as babies and children don't always follow your schedule. Part-time work was a huge thing that was mentioned, and that is something that really majorly helps people get back into the workforce or continue in the workforce. I would love to see more corporate part-time options. I'd like to go back to work part-time now that my son is 2 and a little more independent, but that kind of work is more difficult to find. Both parents working part-time would have been optimal, but the US doesn't do part-time with benefits in the computer science field very well. At least we don't usually have to worry about benefits here. So now I'm full-time at work and my husband is full-time at home. And there's also pointed out that shorter or less days doesn't necessarily mean any less output a lot of the time. I'm sure everyone's had days when it's hit 3 o'clock and you know that your brain is finished for the day, but your work day isn't. Flexible location, allowing working from home and remote work, making travel optional where possible, because arranging care for multiple days is a big challenge. But yeah, it was stated that it's really important to make this possible for everyone in an organisation. So if it's just the parents with young kids who get it, that ends up not working very well. Other things companies can do to support programming parents is professional development being part of the job. Make sure that learning new stuff is a significant part of any job. yeah, again, campaign at work for professional development to be part of the job you do during your work hours. And then, of course, there's one major thing that doesn't help out everyone, just the programming parents, which is childcare. Childcare at conferences and places at work that consider the needs of parents is a really big help to people in the workforce. Also, it can be a good way to retain employees. My wife's company has daycare, but mine does not. It's a fantastic perk and sure to keep an employee who wishes to have stability for their child. Because if you've got daycare at your work, to leave the job, you're also going to be having to move the child's situation. So it's a bit of a sneaky way to, help out your employees and keep those employees. Things the community can do to help support parenting programmers. Also, childcare. Childcare at conferences is the main one. I actually have my own personal nanny I brought, which Ruby AU actually really helped out in letting that happen, so thanks. Conferences should offer childcare. Meetups could do the same, especially for those that are during the daytime. And the time of day of these things is also a big concern because a lot of networking things are in the evening, which is often when kids are being put to bed. And so having a variety of things occurring at a variety of times during the day is a really good way to let different people participate. One thing that's very difficult about doing community-based activity with a kid is if you have a partner that works. My husband normally gets home around 7:30, and so for this person, they can normally only go to these sort of things when they can convince their husband to work from home, which they can't do that often. Also at conferences, most parents struggle to get value out of a lot of the value of conferences being in the networking, but parents often have to go home on time and miss out on that. Also just be aware that the meetups and organising meetups can end up being a bit of an echo chamber because, and I know we've done this with our Christchurch one, when you're organising a meetup, you're organising it for the people that you know will attend, but that means you end up still getting the same people coming because the people who can attend are the people who get to say when they can attend. So you end up in this little self-fulfilling prophecy where the people who come are the ones who decide when it's going to be next, so they're the ones who can come. Perhaps programming parents need to band together and sort out things that work better for them. The current set of offerings definitely seems more tailored to child-free and wealthy people. And, I'd love to hear people's ideas and thoughts on what would work best for them. So in summary, the main things I really want people to take away from this is the general principles of make sure you know your priorities, be reassured it does get easier, but in the meantime, be kind to yourself and just do what works. Good luck.
Does anybody have any questions for Amanda?
Or suggestions for other parents.
Statements? Just wait for the mic. There you go.
Hi. I found it really interesting and I agree with almost everything that you said. One thing you mentioned at the beginning is about you can only sort of have one top priority. And I thought I'd be interested to hear what you think and what others think. I thought that was kind of a bit of an oversimplification because it sort of implied that it was a kind of a binary thing. And in that case, I'm sure everyone had picked their kids. But I think that in practice, it sort of ends up being a lot more fluid than that. And it's about how the distance between the two priorities and maybe, there's a period where you're really busy at work and you say, right, this next 2 weeks, work is my priority and the kids aren't. And I think that's kind of okay. And maybe you say midweek, the work is my priority and weekends, kids the priority and so on. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point and it's definitely true. I think the main thing I found was to be working on this really helped me define that, okay, Theo is my top priority, but within that there is some flexibility. If I found that working on this for the last 2 weeks, I would sometimes be like, okay, well, this has to come before ideally what I'd be doing with him is not what's actually happening, but I'm consciously choosing that. It's not just sort of running together and
sure.
So I think it's just know what your top priority is, and then if you're bending that, do it
Conscious
consciously.
of that too,
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, but yeah, of course it's. I think there is a top, but it's not that simple, and also you can't go, well, if my kid's my top priority, I'm just going to stay home all the time, and then we will have no money and everyone will be out on the streets. So ideally, that doesn't actually work.
My question is related to that. Do you think there's something? I fall into a trap where, and I think this is why I ended up in programming. That you try and get all the variables in your head, and if you work hard enough, and if you just think about it long enough, you'll figure it out. And there seems to be something nice to a rule that just says it's okay just to say no, like don't figure it out, don't put that on yourself. Like, do you find there's something about, like, how is it specific about programming and parenting that is the challenge there? Or did you notice a pattern?
I'll take a quick stab at that one,
Yeah.
if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Is that being analytical, sort of black and whitey people in the it's all ones and zeros. You throw that shit away when kids come along, and it takes a while. For number one, you're like, come on now. Number two's worse, because number one did one thing and number two does a different thing, and then you're like, come on, I know how this stuff works, and then all of a sudden it's broken, and you can't fix it. So being at peace, knowing that this stuff is random, is basically you have to do. But in the first bit, before you actually realise that, it's just frustrating.
Yeah, I think this sort of helped because it gave me some, like, principles to follow. So I can it helped me think about it more analytically as opposed to just sort of like trying to figure everything out and survive day to day, where everything was just sort of devolving into chaos.
So we mentioned a little bit about working from home, but what are your thoughts around sort of actual proper remote work? Because I know that's sort of a hot topic, which a lot of companies tend to pay a bit of lip service to in terms of it's great, let's all get on this bandwagon. But I found that sort of in practice, although there's a lot of large companies like 37 Signal sort of promoting it as being a great thing, a lot of companies in practice tend to prefer everyone in the same room rather than perhaps taking use of more sort of distributed communication tools.
I mean, as I said, I'm not an expert, so I feel slightly uncomfortable answering questions. But I think remote work is one of those things that can be handled really well or really badly. I mean, a lot of people mentioned that if they didn't have time to go to meetups and things, their work is their community. And so it can be, if it's handled badly, it can be really isolating, and probably especially so for someone who's trying to manage it while parenting. So I think a company needs to go into it consciously trying to make it work and trying to provide those sort of low-level communication things where you can just sort of chat and hang out and bond with your coworkers and still get the work done. But I think sort of people are like, yes, we do remote work. But if you just like tag it on, it doesn't actually work. And then they're like, we tried that and it didn't work and everyone felt really isolated, so obviously it just doesn't work for us. So I guess it's not a band-aid, and the company has to really want it. And I think it's really valuable, but hopefully we'll get more companies in.
Bruno might have some insight. He's a remote worker.
Hi, I'm a parent, and wouldn't consider myself a developer, but I'm trying. Well, it's just self-confidence. Attempting to be a farmer. So I live on a farm, and all our team is completely distributed, and a lot of us are parents in our team. So we don't have an office, and that's a conscious decision to create that idea that there is no central place. There is no difference between our colleague, who is the only Argentinian here that came from Argentina for this conference. He was also a parent and also remote worker in a rural town in Argentina. And so what we created is an environment where usually what we tend to do, and that works for us as parents, is to work before the kids wake up. And that depends on each child and each parent. So my son wakes up at 9, which is quite incredible, but he goes to sleep at 10 at night, right? So it's quite, it's a very Argentinian way of doing things. The day starts later. I'm Argentinian as well. But, for some other colleagues, their kids wake up at 5, so that's not possible. So I wake up at, 5:30 or 6, and I get a couple of hours in the morning, which is my way of getting started. What are the problems I want to solve today? And just even maybe have a stab at it, And then once my son, Zeke, wakes up and just, start the routine and disconnect completely from work, and everyone knows I'm unavailable during that time. I mean, Campfire is open. We have these asynchronous communications, but, that happens. And then once he's at school, because he's 6 years old now, so we've learned this routine together. So he knows that, when the time for school is, when we go and drop him at school, which is across the paddocks from where we are, and then come back and start work, and when school finishes, work is finished until 8:30 when, we finish dinner, we finish the routine, and he might be reading a little bit in bed, and, he's struggling to go to sleep. And he's like, I don't wanna. But, that's the things. You establish the routines based on the rhythms of your family. They're all different. And for Jorge, who's the Argentinian guy, he enjoys the morning with his kid that goes to school in the afternoon, and then he works with us in his evening. So we have some overlap during our morning, his evening. He works usually around until 1 a.m. when his family is asleep, because that's the quiet time. And there's also no distractions, right? So the kids are asleep. There's no things to go out to, get to the shops or anything like that. So you actually can focus your whole, attention and, mind power into what you want to solve at that time. But those are personal rhythms. Right? So I'm not offering this as a solution, just as practical examples of things that work as well, as a parent.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of value in not saying this is what you should do, but just this is what works for me, to get ideas and imagine what else you could do to really make your life work.
Tim? 2 minutes.
That was a great talk, thanks. The link you've got on screen there is the survey itself.
Yes, I was going to say I'll leave it up. So I'd love to get more responses, and hopefully after doing this, what I'd love to do is write up a web page and have all the information there, so that the sort of information keeps going rather than just be constrained to one talk. So I'd love to have more responses, or just feel free to email me, which is amanda@awagener.com. The page has a link to my Twitter or my GitHub, which must eventually lead to my email. It occurs to me I haven't put my email there at all. But yeah, I mean, if you want to chat to me in person or on Twitter or email, that would be great as well. But
that's great. That was my question.
Thank
Thanks.
you. I was hoping to slide that in somewhere.
Anyone else have one more? Yep.
Thanks. It's less of a question, more of a suggestion. I actually found I could take things from software development and apply it to parenting. So we started using a Kanban board at home to handle tasks for the older kids. So it's like, okay, now you have to brush your teeth, and now you have to get dressed, and that's just one thing that I found really useful.
That's
Fantastic.
awesome.
Agile family works.
Try.
Iterate often.
Yeah.
All right, guys, let's thank Amanda.